Okay, something happened to me in Basra in southern Iraq last year, which made me think about Britain today, who we are, where we are, and how we can get to somewhere new. So what I want to do is I want to start off in Iraq generally, fly around to a few different places, and then we'll go back to that incident in Basra. So the first thing we did, I was out there making a documentary for the BBC. We released a bear in the mountains in Kurdistan in the north of Iraq. And this bear gingerly got out of this cage and then ran and dived on somebody. Luckily, he didn't eat him, and he didn't eat me either. But Iraq would get a little bit more dangerous than that. One day, ISIS killed some Iraqi soldiers and took their uniforms and put those uniforms on and then set up a fake checkpoint. And that same day, we were going to go down that road chasing a story. But luckily, we'd created a huge security network, so somebody called us and warned us off, and we managed to get away with it. When I think about that incident, I can still remember the cold fear I had. I knew I couldn't have defended myself. I knew I would have lost my life, I would have been killed on the side of a road in Iraq that day. And then, why was I there? Why was I in Iraq doing this trip? It was because I wanted to see what the country was like 15 years after I invaded. Me and some of my friends went across the border one March night in 2003, along with the United States Marines, and invaded that country. But why was I a British soldier, this brown boy? Well, I grew up in Burnley, which is about 30 miles north of here. And growing up in the 80s in Burnley was quite hard. Way before I was born, Burnley was the most important cotton weaving centre in the world. Huge mills sat on the side of the Leeds and Liverpool Canal, roaring with industry. And then the competition started to grow. So the mill owners thought, hang on, these mills are open during the day, why don't we open them at night as well? And they asked the people of Lancashire, they said, do you want to work at night? And the people of Lancashire said, no thanks. So the mill owners got hold of the government, and the government managed to get hold of lots of people from the Indian subcontinent to come over. That's why my family's here. And then the government thought they were going to get reciprocal trade and basically sent our technology abroad, sent the best cotton weaving machines abroad, but the business went that way too. And then engineering pretty much failed as well in Lancashire. And then what you had was no jobs and more people. And that's when the fighting started, and it stayed. Racism came out of that desperation. So when I was growing up in Burnley, I had to run away at the end of school. And some days they caught me and kicked my head in. And some days I got away from them because you learned how to run. And then some days I kicked their heads in because you learned how to fight as well. And then another thing that happened that really struck me while I was growing up was me and my mum went out to buy some wallpaper. And this car screeched right up next to us. And this guy stuck his head out the window, spat at us, and shouted, "Packies." And my mum grabbed me and put me in between her legs. I was about 7 years old, I couldn't do anything. And I remember feeling really vulnerable and thinking, my God, what if they'd attacked my mum? So that was Burnley back in the 80s, and you kind of had to make a decision whether you were British or you were Pakistani. And I wasn't brave enough to be a Pakistani back then, so I chose British. I chose British so much that I packed my Pakistani identity away and put on a British Army uniform. But something weird happened once I did that. I went down to Winchester, did my basic training, and the Army, and I found a community that I actually wanted to be part of. The Army said, no, hey, be a Pakistani. It doesn't matter. What matters to us is if you're fit enough and you can do your job. And that was about it. I was tested just on my ability. Could I run this fast? Could I shoot that far? That was about it. I met men and women in the military that became closer to me than my own family because we shared the same values. Get in the ring, fight as hard as you can, and remember, you might not make it. And that happened too. So one night, I was in Kuwait, stood to attention with me and my mates, watching two of my other mates being carried past me in coffins onto the back of a plane. We needed each other in that desert. We depended on each other. And we made ourselves a promise. So when you're not strong, I'll be for you. And when I'm not strong, can you be for me? And that built this unit because we were fighting for something that was greater than us. We didn't think about ourselves. So we gelled together. We became a real family. And so that was the British Army who basically dragged the Pakistani back out of me and allowed me to be proud of myself and be whoever I wanted to be. And now, Burnley is changing as well. You know, it's not just fighting all the time, because if I said that to you, I'd be lying. It's just a sexy headline, isn't it? The truth is far more complicated. It always is. And Burnley's getting better. And when I was growing up there, yes, there was the fighting, but there was also a lot of help. Every time I asked for help, it was there. If it was the teachers at school, it was the soldiers at war, and the editors and the journalists of this newspaper when I worked there for a bit, there's always been a lot of white hands pulling me up. And that's just the truth. So let's go back to Basra, back to Iraq. The last thing I did on that documentary was I went back to where I'd served. And I went back and I sought out the places where my friends were, the last few moments of their lives, where they were ambushed and killed and then thrown in shallow graves. So I looked for their last moments, and I also met someone who tried to kill me and my friends in 2006. He was a proud Iraqi, you know, and you can call him an insurgent, you can call him part of the resistance, you can call him what you like. I wasn't there as a soldier this time, I was just there as a civilian, as a journalist, hunting for the truth. But he was part of a team that was firing rockets at us. So if you imagine this place right now, imagine we're bombed about 12 to 15 times a day. And I don't know if anybody here was in the military at the time, but that's kind of what we did in Iraq at 2006, 2007. The British Army just sat there and took fire. It was kind of our leaving present from the insurgency. And as I talked to him, I realized something. I don't need to be angry at him, and this doesn't need to carry on either. And Britain is really divided today. You can always point to rocks being thrown from one camp to the other. But me and this guy just sat there on this rooftop in Basra and talked and smoked and joked into the night, and he was a funny guy. And he was also the future of Iraq. We'd been there, we'd fought, and then we'd left. That was it, wasn't it? I could have been angry with him, but then I just talked to him. And we didn't wait for the government to tell us to talk to each other. We didn't wait for the government to direct us. It was just two civilians talking to each other, trying to get somewhere new, trying to understand each other. And that's where I think we are today. All wars end with talking. It happened in Ireland. It's happening in Afghanistan, kind of. And it'll happen here. We've got a really hard conversation to have in this country. And that conversation is, you know, we've got to be there for people who aren't strong enough today to get on in this society. We've got to realize that leadership isn't running faster than everybody else. It's about taking everybody with you. And we've also got to realize that we've got to get on with each other. Because if we don't, the world is growing, and we're just going to keep fighting. So that's what I want to say to you today. I went there and I fought, and I sat there and I talked with this guy on the rooftop, and I let go of everything, and it made it better. All wars end with talking. So let's talk. Thank you.